welcome on in to another episode of Getting Wild with Terry and Friends, NHL preview show edition. And yes, it is the Capitals Day. Toby, let's go Caps. We'll be going over the Capitals offseason. We'll say hello to our guests. We have a new guest here, Jacob. Welcome on in. The Caps jersey there. If you want to quickly say hello to everyone and tell them a little bit about you, the floor is yours.
Well, first off, thank you guys for having me on. I'm stoked. Yeah, I mean, as you can see, wrong way. That's my squad. Always been my squad. There goes Nick there. Yeah, I've been following hockey since I was about 6 years old. I played 12 amateur years. So, I mean, it's been a big part of my life. Washington's always been my team. I do work for, well, not for the team, but I do an admin for Freeze the Puck Hockey for the Capitals. We just hit 10,000 followers with that the other day. Guest appearances on the power play point with Blue Liner for the Caps. So, I mean, this has been a crazy off season for me, man. I'm ready to dive right into it.
Perfect. And we'll jump right into it with the first segment, additions and subtractions. And I'll bring up the stats here. The Capitals, the first thing I noticed right off the bat is that they decided to part ways with their top three goaltenders in Ilya Samsonov, Vitek Vanacek, and Phoenix Copley, their third. So I guess they're going in a completely new direction when it comes to goaltending. I guess I'll start with, I was surprised that they let Samsonov go. I'm surprised they didn't trade him. Maybe there's a reason for that, but I was kind of surprising to see him go in free agency. The other names, Justin Schultz, obviously will make a difference not being there on the blue line. The bottom two guys, I'll be honest, I don't really know a whole lot about them. But I think the really big names here in the subtractions are the three goaltenders and Justin Schultz. Looking at what they brought in, Charlie Lindgren, who's slated to be the backup, Connor Brown in a trade, Eric Gustafsson, Dylan Strome, Henrik Borgstrom, and Gabriel Carlson. And, of course, Darcy Kemper. Kemper, I still have a signed picture of him that a friend in Minnesota sent me. He was my favorite goaltender when he played for the Wild. And has definitely gone on to be more of a consistent goaltender in his time since then. 5-year deal for Kemper. The Capitals really believe in him, and he is their guy going forward. So an interesting addition and subtractions here for the Capitals. I don't think we've really seen any other teams completely replace all three goaltenders that they have. So we'll have to see what happens. An interesting addition subtractions off season. Jacob, we'll go to you first. Addition subtractions. What do you think here?
I was really happy with, and I'll start by agreeing with you. I was kind of surprised that they didn't even offer Samsonov a qualifying offer. But the reality of the situation was, outside of, you can make the argument, the Florida series, him or Vanacek, neither one ever really made a solid argument why they should be the number one guy. Like you said, bringing in Kemper on a 5-year deal, that takes away that distraction, because on a team it is a distraction when you don't have that guy that you know you can trust. Kemper, the only thing that really worries me is he had the eye injury. Now, also with who he played with in Colorado, I mean, that was just a wagon. But the optimistic thing for me with Kemper is when he played in Arizona, I believe it was 122 games he started, and they recorded points in 77 of those games. And he was able to make an all-star appearance with that team. So, but he's also 32 years old, so the same age as Holtby, actually. So I'm hoping that we get the Arizona Kemper. If we can get that, then I think a lot of their issues will be resolved, not completely because I still am not huge on the defense. But overall, I'm really happy with what they did this offseason.
All right. Ryan, additions, subtractions. What do you think of the Capitals offseason?
Yeah, I think Kemper's the big name here. He's going to bring 37 wins and a cup victory to the team. And in terms of the free agent goalies, I think he's a bigger land than Jack Campbell. So, and it's just like Jacob mentioned, it's a complete difference in style than the Caps approached in the past. Whereas Samsonov and Vanacek were split down the middle in terms of workload. There's going to be one guy here. In addition to the injury issues, the one concern I have is Charlie Lindgren. He's sort of an unproven backup, and we've seen how important backup goalies can be in this league. So that's really my concern. Some of these other names on the list are worth mentioning. There's some big injuries, right? So Backstrom is injured, Tom Wilson is injured, and we don't know when they're coming back. So Dylan Strome steps in and basically into Nicholas Backstrom's role, and he's going to be pretty competent doing that, I think. And at 25, he's sort of like the little kid on the team, which is surprising and an indictment of the age of this team. Connor Brown's a two-way winger that complements the people that he plays with. So I think that there's some speculation that he could end up playing on the top line, that he may be a little bit more dynamic than TJ Oshie, so he could end up playing opposite Ovechkin. I'm not a good judge of value on these acquisitions, but the perception is that the moves were shrewd because of the value that they got for these players. Basically, they didn't even know that Dylan Strome was going to be on the market this year. So there's some really good opportunities that were obtained. The only names I'll mention is Johan Larson. He came to the team from the Coyotes at the trade deadline, but fairly recently he said he's going back to Sweden. So he could have been a part of the third line this year instead of Lars Eller at center. So we lost that part. And there was also rumors of Mason Marchment coming to the team. So there's a little bit of disappointment in that, but that's probably unrealistic.
All right. Ian, Capitals, what do you think of their offseason here?
It's really a mixed bag for me. It's a lot of question marks with some of the guys they brought in. Kemper certainly is going to help them in goal. I think it's easy to see that that's going to be an upgrade based on what they got last year from the collective of Samsonov and Vanacek. It was just not good enough or consistent enough from either of those two guys at the in between the pipes last year. So having Kemper and now a Stanley Cup champion on your roster as your number one goaltender is a good way to go. Dylan Strome, I was impressed with the year he had in Chicago. I like that fit pretty well for this team, and I've always been a big Connor Brown fan. He can get you 20, 30 goals. He's very good away from the puck. He plays in all situations, power play, penalty kill, 5-on-5. It's definitely going to be a guy that's going to help this team. When you look at free agency, obviously, Samsonov being gone, it's kind of surprising, but at the same time, didn't pan out for him last year. And once Darcy Kemper became available, and I think once they found out that, hey, we got a good chance to land Darcy Kemper, that was bye-bye Ilya Samsonov at that time. And that's really what it was. And to see them just jettison both him and Vanacek out tells you just how much I think they were dissatisfied with the play they got in between the pipes last year for this team. So, like I say, it's an upgrade in net. We'll get to the roster, so I'll save that for, the lineup. There are still depth concerns all over this roster. I don't love the blue line. I don't like the third and the fourth line if we're going to get much punch offensively from them. They're going to have to stay healthy, and I'll get into that more once we talk about the lineup.
For sure. We'll go on to the next part. Speaking of staying healthy, we'll definitely see their current cap hit as well. So currently the cap hit is at $88 million. They are $6 million below the cap. $6 million above, but they have $17 million in injuries, and that's not listed. Just using Cap Friendly's numbers there, but they're currently not on IR. Looking at their top prospects, the one name that really stands out there is Hendrix Lapierre. They're a top prospect from the consensus for what I was seeing. Alexander Alexiev has injury issues, but he's a big defenseman and definitely a good prospect. If he could stay healthy, I really think he could do some good stuff here for the Capitals defense in the future, but he's just having injury issues. Looking at the upcoming free agents, there's a lot of them. In fact, every single defenseman except one, and that is John Carlson, sorry. Every other defenseman is a free agent after the season. So the Capitals' defense could look completely different after this year. Dylan Strome, Connor Brown, who we just discussed, are both upcoming free agents as well. Garnet Hathaway, Dmitry Orlov, obviously the rest of the defensemen there. A lot of names upcoming free agents. So Washington could look a bit different next year if they obviously decide to part ways with a lot of these guys. Ian, we'll go to you first this time. What do you think about the prospects and the big list of upcoming free agents for the Capitals?
Yeah, this is good. This is a team that's really caught in the middle. They don't want to completely rebuild yet because they've still got your old veteran stalwarts that still want one more shot at a Stanley Cup. When you talk about Nick Backstrom and Alex Ovechkin and Kuznetsov and Oshie, and all these veterans that have been here now for several years, so they still don't want to abandon contending, but at the same time, they're kind of right in the middle, and they're not exactly bad enough to be completely rebuilding. So they're in a tricky situation. As far as the prospect pool is concerned, I think there's potential for Hendrix Lapierre. Keep in mind, he got a good amount of NHL time last year with this team. But again, what's the ceiling for him coming into the year? Going to be interesting. But, in terms of overall prospect pools, this is a bottom tier prospect pool right now. They lack high-end talent. They just haven't been able to draft. The draft capital just hasn't been there for Washington. And this is where years and years, and quite frankly, a decade plus of contending every year just chips away at your prospect system. If you don't have draft capital and you're not picking top 5, top 10 in the first round every year, you're going to have a much harder time building up a prospect pool. And then at the trade deadline, the draft capital you do have, well, guess what? You're trading it away for established roster players to help you win a Stanley Cup. So that's why Washington's in the situation they're in right now. They don't have a very good prospect pool. It is one of the worst in the NHL. And most of the prospects they have, like Hendrix Lapierre, could be a very good prospect, but is he going to be a franchise game breaker or someone to build around? No. The same thing goes with a lot of the other guys, with Alexei Protas. Same thing goes with Oscar Magnuson, Axel Falby. All of these guys, Alexander Alexiev, all of these guys are projected to be pretty solid prospects, but are any of them going to be those franchise changers for you? Not necessarily. And that, again, is because the Washington Capitals have been devoid of drafting in the positions that teams like Detroit and Columbus and Buffalo and teams like that have been drafting over the years. So it's a very weak, poor prospect pool. And that's why they're in a tough spot. Like if this season falls off the rails, your cupboard is bare from a prospect standpoint. If you have a bad year, you're probably going to start to then look toward the long-term future. And to me, Washington's on that team that's falling out of that contender spot, but they still think they can be one. They're still trying to be one. And I don't think they're really fully ready to let go of that. And the fact that I don't think as of right now, their current roster is where Rangers are, Carolina is, Tampa is in the other division, Florida, Toronto, other teams like that. And that's why they're in a very tough spot. And that's why if this is a bad year and they finally decide, we're going to rebuild, they better get to it, and they better realize it's going to take a while because the prospect pool needs to be built up because it's as bare as it gets right now.
All right. When you were just talking there, you reminded me of it sounds like the Chicago Blackhawks. They didn't want to rebuild. It took them a while to finally say they're going to do it, but they kind of stayed in that trying to compete for longer.
Last year's Chicago, Terry, to that point, could be this year's Washington, where they're coming into the year still thinking, we think we're still good. We think we're still a playoff team. We think we're still a Stanley Cup contender. And then it all falls apart. And right from the beginning of the season, it just doesn't go right. That's what it was like for Chicago last year. And then they said, finally, well, you know what? We're going to bite the bullet. We're finally going to tear this thing down and build and rebuild. That could be Washington this year if things don't go well. If this is a bad season, and let's say they miss the playoffs, and I don't think it's a guarantee they make the playoffs. If they miss the playoffs, they're going to absolutely, I think, look to themselves and say, time to rebuild, time to look toward the long-term future, because this prospect pool needs rebuilding big time.
For sure. Ryan, what do you think about the prospects upcoming free agents for the Capitals?
I agree with Ian. The prospects aren't likely to make an immediate impact. Mirza Shenko is an interesting story. He's their most recent draft pick, and he's getting treatment for Hodgkin's lymphoma. So he could be a feel-good story, and he could fit in with sort of the Russian brotherhood that exists in this team. Alexei Protas is interesting because he's 6'6", so he's got a unique body type. Vinny Iorio, he's Brandon Wheat Kings, and he's only 19, so he's not going to make an immediate impact. The one name on the free agents, in my opinion, that's important is Martin Fahrivari. Like, I hope we sign this guy. I hope he stays with the team. He's 7th in the league in hits, and I think he's going to be an important part of an aging defense corps. You know, we need the young guy. You know, we need to keep him on the team. And I think also there's the possibility, heaven forbid, if this team is out of contention in the spring, the floodgates are going to open. There's going to be a lot of there's going to be a lot of movement.
All right. Jacob, what do you think about the prospects and the upcoming free agents for your Capitals?
I'm basically on the same page with both you guys. I'm not a fan of the prospect pool, really. I will bring up the fact that Protas actually did play a significant amount of time with the Caps last year. And if I remember correctly, he even spent some time on Ovi's line. So they think really highly of him. And obviously LaPierre comes out, scores in his first game. That was a little feel-good moment with him and his Ovechkin poster. As far as free agents, yeah, Fahrivari is in my opinion, probably highest priority for me, along with looking at it, probably Orlov. Eller's gone after this year. I don't see them keeping him, whether it's they just don't re-sign him after this year or they get rid of him at the deadline somehow. But if you'll remember last year, they got so down on him that they switched him to wing and were giving McMichael more looks at center. So, yeah, Ian laid it out really well. When you're a very good team, a playoff team for a decade, that draft capital it's not what it is. You don't have high picks. And, you know, aside from a couple of the drafts in the last few years, they haven't necessarily been very deep. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do. They have the potential to clear a lot of room, though. So, I mean, there is the possibility that you could do a temporary rebuild with the cleared cap room for the guys that you don't bring back. I think they bring Sherry back as long as he replicates last year, too. Because he's on a very team-friendly deal for as productive as he was last year.
All right. Yeah, we'll definitely have to see what happens here in the offseason. We will take a look now at the possible lineup that I put together. Just 1 second here. And obviously, as mentioned, 3 injuries right off the bat. Backstrom, Tom Wilson, and Carl Haglin. Jacob, you gave me an update on Carl Haglin today, if you want to give that out.
Yeah, Carl Haglin ditched the light blue no contacts jerseys in practice. He was a full participant, white contact jerseys. They haven't released a statement on any plans on what they want to do with him, but that's not really out of the ordinary because they've been kind of tight-lipped about injuries lately anyways. But it was really good to see him out there as a full participant in practice today.
All right. Back to the possible lineup here that I put together. And apparently I'm not as familiar with LaPierre as you guys. If he did, obviously he played in the NHL last year. So he's probably going to be maybe the third line center. So so we can switch him up there and maybe move Nick Dowd down. I've put Dylan Strome at number 2 here. Kuznetsov, obviously Kuznetsov and Ovechkin, that's easy. They're the top line. I have Oshie here, but maybe Connor Brown, maybe Mantha, who knows? But the overall lineup here, there's lots you could really do with it, especially the bottom 2 lines. And then you look at the defense. Carlson, obviously, the top on the top pair. Everything else, I think the defense is kind of weak, and I think really you could put anybody anywhere, because I don't think there's a lot of disparate. Like, I think the teams, the players are pretty close in talent. Looking at goaltending, Kemper, Lindgren, and Fucali. Apparently, from what I've heard now, that Lindgren is going to be the backup. Fucali got into some action last year, so I have him here as the 3rd. Maybe he challenges for the backup position. We'll have to see. But overall, obviously Ovechkin, you're going to score some goals. But after that, question marks for me. The Capitals are a really hard team for me to get a feeling for. I could see them continuing their playoff streak, and then I could see them kind of falling apart. Pittsburgh and Washington are those 2 teams that people have been saying are going to take a step backwards for a few years now. Neither have done it yet, but I'm sure those days are coming. But I'm just not really sure about the Capitals. I could see a lot of different things happening with this lineup. Jacob, we'll go to you next. What do you think about the lineup here for the Caps?
Well, the one thing that I don't think they're going to do, I don't think they're going to take Nick Dowd off the 4th line, especially after last year, because those guys, along with Larson, who's gone now, that leaves a hole on that line. They meshed really well, and they were one of the grittiest lines on the team. They called them the hard work line. But, I mean, those guys actually got a pretty good amount of production. So I think Nick Dowd and Hathaway are probably a lock to stay on the 4th. Yeah, it's like you said, it's hard to kind of break down. I don't know how quickly they're going to throw LaPierre into the fire. My 3rd line that I wrote down, I had Brown, Eller, and McMichael, though. And I have Sherry on my 2nd line, because I think that as long as he has a good camp, like I said earlier, with the year he had last year, I think they're going to reward him with that playing time just to see how he meshes in. The bottom 6 is really a scramble. I mean, you could put guys anywhere, but it's like I was saying to you, I wouldn't be surprised to see maybe at some point Eller become a healthy scratch. And the defense, I think they're probably going to stick with the Carlson-Fahrivari lineup. Orlov and Jensen played a lot together last year, but then that would leave TVR and Gustafson. So it's a lot of question marks for me, but I think in my mind at least the top 6 is pretty much solidified. But there's, like you said, it's really difficult to get a grasp on that bottom 6. You pretty much put anyone anywhere.
All right, Ryan, what do you think about the lineup for the Caps?
Well, I think the number one thing is injuries. So everything changes. If Nicholas Backstrom and Tom Wilson come back, then there's some switches. Wilson goes to the top line. Backstrom likely centers the 2nd line. So things kind of move around. And I've heard a lot, Jacob's comment about Lars Eller getting healthy scratch. Like, there seems to be a lot of negativity around him. So one of the questions is, how can the Caps replace that piece or find a better fit for that piece? Evgeny Kuznetsov, he at some point last year, his stock was going down. There was some negativity in the fans and in the coaches, it seemed like. And then he had a breakout year, and seems like there's just a lot more positivity, and there's a lot of good things on the horizon for him. So that's improving. TJ Oshie is now 35, and he's kind of the heart and soul of the team. And if you watch the broadcast, one of the things they like to put up is this is the Caps record when TJ Oshie plays, and this is the Caps record when he doesn't play. So he doesn't put up real measurable goals and assists, but he helps the team win, and it's documented. The only other names worth mentioning, actually Janssen Fjallby. Apparently, he was productive at Hershey last year and could be a piece here, but I've heard that it depends on Carl Haglin's health, and now we're hearing good news about that. So he may be lost in the shuffle here, but there's a lot of moving pieces that has to do with Backstrom and Wilson's health.
Yeah, obviously two huge parts of the team, so them being in would definitely help the Caps for sure. Ian, what do you think about the possible lineup for the Caps here?
I mean, this is a team that's got lots of question marks, concerns. Tom Wilson's not coming back till December, as he's rehabbing from that knee injury. Nick Backstrom had resurfacing hip surgery, back in June. There's no timetable for his return. It's a real moving target for him, because this is already a guy that's had a lot of wear and tear on him, played a lot of years, a lot of games in the NHL. And this exact surgery that he had is a surgery that Anaheim's Ryan Kessler had, and he never played again after. So this is scary. It's not a guarantee Backstrom resumes his NHL playing career. Seriously. I mean, that's where we're at with him right now. There's absolutely no indication whatsoever of a firm trajectory for his return. And you're already without Wilson till December. So you've already got these concerns, which means you're going to have to shake up this lineup a little bit and look to tinker with it a little bit. Now, could I see Oshie playing on the top line? I could see that now with Ovechkin because of the absences. What are you going to do at the center spot with Backstrom out? Are you going to go maybe Kuznetsov, Strome, Eller down the middle, potentially? You're going to does Hendrix Lapierre get more of an opportunity now because of this? There's a lot of questions that have to be asked right now about what this lineup, especially with the forward group, is going to look like. As far as the defense, I echo what everybody else says. There's depth concerns there. Eric Gustafsson is a liability in his own end. He's going to help offensively, but he can sometimes really, really struggle. He sometimes gets out-muscled in front of the net for loose pucks, which is not what you want to see from your defenseman. Trevor Van Riemsdyk, solid, but again, not always consistent. Nick Jensen was pretty good when they got him from Detroit, but I don't think he had his best year. Orlov's still pretty steady. He's probably their best defender when it's all said and done. John Carlson, of course, terrific offensive season last year, still above average defensively. They have a lot of high hopes and a lot of expectations now for Martin Fahrivari as well. Guy that really progressed last year and got better, but you better hope you don't have too many of these guys injured, because we see how many teams struggle when they got 2-3 starting defensemen out. If this ever happens to Washington this year, there's some serious concerns they have. So depth in the blue line's a worry. The absences of Wilson and Backstrom means there's going to be shakeups, means there's going to have to be some continuity and chemistry developing with all new line combinations. I've got in October and November, but especially in October, Washington is circled as a bet against team. And it's just because of all of these changes that are going on. And I'm not sure the continuity and the chemistry is going to be there early in the season.
Yeah.
Could I piggyback on that real quick?
Sure.
So it's like when you and I were discussing it last night, the one thing that I do think works in their favor is, as you mentioned, Wilson is out until December. Through the new year, they have 39 games, and 21 of those games are against non-playoff teams. So I think that's something that could potentially work in their favor.
Yep.
If you've got Ovechkin scoring, that's always a threat. He's going to take attention away from another team's defense. So you've seen that happen a lot of times, especially like with Oshie on the power play. They'll find him in that little bumper slot. So I think that the offensive capability is still there. Like you said, I do have a major concern with the defense. And as great a year as Carlson had last year, there's been times where he's been the biggest liability on that blue line.
Yep.
If you just go back to that Florida series, the goal where Patrick Hornquist got the breakaway, he was caught cheating, and then Fahrivari had to try and cover the entire rink and just had no time. the goal that sent them home. Again, Carlson was caught on the outside hash lines, and he left the front of the net wide open. So for Verhaeghe. So I think that we're pretty much in agreement there, but I also think that that schedule in the first few months is a little bit more favorable to a team that's having issues with injury.
I think we lost
Did we-
Terry.
Oh, I'm back.
I was
there you
about to
go.
say, we lose our host.
We
No,
did. He's
I
back.
don't know what happened there. There was an error.
No, that's
Continue
good.
on,
They
or are we
do have a
moving on?
favorable schedule. That is a good thing for Washington early on. That will help them. Yeah, it's funny with Carlson. He had that great offensive year, all the points, and he gives some of them back with haphazard play in his own end. So he giveth and he taketh away as well, John Carlson, last year at times.
For sure. And we'll go on to the last part of the show, and that's looking at the last 5 years and the futures for the Capitals here. So first thing that we see is our first team here that has won a cup in the last 5 years, and that is the Capitals, winning the cup in 2017, 2018. Ever since then, first round exits every single year. So they've been consistent in that point since winning the cup. Point total 95.5. To make the playoffs, minus 160, yes. Plus 130, no. Plus 750 to win the division. Plus 4,000 to hoist the cup again. I would lean with the under 95.5. Not something I'm going to bet. And I guess I would lean with the no to the playoffs as well. Again, something I'm not going to bet. I need to see what happens with this Capitals team throughout the beginning of the season before I can really make a judgment on them. Like I said, them and Pittsburgh have been teams that people have been saying are going to take that step back and haven't quite really done that yet. So we're going to have to see. Miracles do happen. There are surprises every year. So the Capitals could be a surprise, either positively or negatively. But really, they're a hard team for me to grasp. We'll go to Jacob next. What do you think here? The futures and the last 5 years for the Caps.
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm 20% happy with the last 5 years. So, but as far as futures, they're just going to have to get off to a hot start. You know, I brought up that schedule. They're going to have to take. They're going to have to win most of those games against those non-playoff teams, because I think if you get to a spot where Wilson gets back and you're 8 to 10 points out of a playoff spot, I don't think they can come back from that. And the reason I say that is I take a look at last year. They had in January and February, they were 8-12-2, and they only had a .409 points percentage. And they have not really been that good at the turn of a calendar. Also, the other thing from last year that was really disappointing was they didn't get their first win in overtime until December 6th against Anaheim. They were 0-6 before that. They ended up kind of turning that ship around. They finished 9-14, including the 2 OT losses against Florida in the playoffs. But that's 12 points that you're just giving away because they had an inability to end games in an extra frame. So that's something that does concern me. I would agree with you on going the under on the points total. I feel like plus 4,000 should be the odds to win the damn division, much less the cup, because that's just how good New York and Carolina are. I've got them limping in at the same spot they had last year as the last wild card.
All right. Ryan, futures, last 5 years for the Caps. What do you think?
Yeah, I was going to make the exact same point that Jacob made, and that is the Caps left points on the table last year because of their poor overtime record. And the other thing too to mention is that in the conference there was a big gap. You know, the Caps had 100 points; they were pretty close to the Bruins, and then 16 points lower was the Islanders at 84. So that gap could still be there. So they may be able to make the playoffs because of that gap. And the other thing is that because the Caps weren't being chased from behind, they lost 8 of their last 10 games. So because they weren't motivated to win them. We were in playoff position, but so I think there was definitely some points left on the table last year for the Caps. And obviously there's going to be some, we have some injury concerns and we have some aging concerns, but the whole Metropolitan Division is getting older. Like the Penguins, the Islanders, and the Flyers also have older teams as well. So I think there is a case to be made that the Caps do eclipse or meet their point total from last year and make the playoffs because of those conditions that are in place.
All right. Yeah, I think the Capitals' best hope is if you get a really good Kemper. If Kemper is able to withstand the defense and play like he has, then the Capitals could definitely have a chance to exceed their point total and definitely make the playoffs again. But I think Kemper is like the guy that you're going to really need with that defense. Ian, what do you think about the futures for the Caps in the last 5 years?
The biggest factor for Washington that's going against them, I think, making the playoffs. I did bet no plus 130. I've got major issues. I know Jacob said about the easier schedule. That's a lifeline for them. That at least they're going to have some winnable games early in the season with no Backstrom for who knows how long, and no Tom Wilson until at least December. But I think they could get victimized in terms of a playoff spot by that ever-improving Atlantic Division, the other division in this conference. I think that division's taken both wild cards this year. I really believe that. I think Detroit, Ottawa, Buffalo, even Buffalo, teams like that could end up sneaking up and getting those wild card spots ahead of, your Islanders, your Penguins, your Capitals, Devils, the rest of that Metro division. It's very possible. Like someone's going to have to finish third in the Metro. I've got Rangers, Carolina, 1-2. You could flip-flop them. Carolina, Rangers, Carolina. They're the top 2 teams in that division. And then it's a mad scramble for third. And I really fear this year with the way the layout is and how the balance of power has shifted, the Atlantic now to me is the better division, top to bottom, the deeper division. It's going to be paramount to finish third in the Metro, because if you don't and you're outside the top 3 in the Metro in that division, you could be on the outside looking in at playoff time this year. That could end up being what happens here. So it's very important for Washington to finish third. They certainly still could, and I wouldn't rule that out. But I don't think they're going to get as fortunate as they did last year, where a wild card is what they got. That's how they ended up in the playoffs. If they settle for a wild card this year, they may not get it, as far as I'm concerned. So I thought the no at plus 130 was worth a shot. I lean under with the point total, but I thought it was fairly priced at 95.5 because I could see them being close to that number. But I did bet them no to make the playoffs at plus 130. And again, like I said, I think it's going to be very important for them, Pittsburgh, Islanders, those 3 teams in particular, because I don't think the Devils, the Flyers are ready to contend for the playoffs just yet. But the Capitals, the Penguins, and the Islanders are those group of teams that are that next group in the Metro after Carolina and the Rangers that are going to battle tooth and nail for third. And if those teams don't get that third spot, they are in grave danger of missing the playoffs, because I think there's a real shot that both of your wild card teams in the Eastern Conference this year come from the Atlantic Division. That's the hurdle that Washington, among other teams in this division, has to face.
Also, too, Ryan, you brought up the gap between the Capitals and the Islanders. Let's not forget that the Islanders had to start the season on what was the 13, 14-game road streak because they didn't have an arena. And then that team got absolutely wrecked with COVID. So I could also make the contention that they had probably one of the most unfortunate run-ins with bad luck of any individual team I've ever seen in a season. You're not going to have that this year. So I don't think that gap is going to be quite as prevalent as it was last year.
Good point.
Yep.
Yeah, if you missed the Islanders show, make sure to tune into it. We did already do it. I'll give my opinion with the Islanders is the coach. I think having Trotz gone is a big thing for me with the Islanders, where I'm not quite sure that they really exceed much from what they did last year. But that's just my
Their
opinion.
style of play is not going to change very much, by the way. Lane Lambert, who's
No.
taken over, was a Trotz disciple. He learned under the Barry Trotz coaching tree, was with him in Washington. Even I think later in his Nashville days, he actually started as an assistant. Been with Trotz ever since. He's taken over. It's still going to be the same system, same structure, defense first, take care of your own end first. So, stylistically, they're not going to look much different.
And we know what it's like to fire Barry Trotz in favor for one of his assistants. It didn't turn out well.
No,
Yeah, so we'll have to see what happens.
that's true. That is very true.
But Ryan, anything else you want to say? Anybody else want to say anything?
Nothing bad.
All right. Well, that is the Capital Show. If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. If you like the content, smash the like button. We appreciate all the support. Tomorrow will be the Pittsburgh Penguins. We'll have Melissa, most likely Nicholas Earl, Ian. You're coming on tomorrow, yeah?
Yeah, I
Right,
will be here. Yep.
Perfect. The four of us will go over the Pittsburgh Penguins then tomorrow. Thanks everybody for watching, and have a good night, guys.
Thanks for having me.